scramble for Africa began when the Americas didn't really become viable for colonies anymore. You see, around this point, almost all of the Americas were now made of independent countries, with only a few islands and a few small coastal territories remaining colonized. So, Europe now had to look at another continent. They decided to look at Africa. There weren't that many colonies there yet, and it would be one of the best places to set up a colony. So they split up the entire continent like a pizza in the Treaty of Berlin. However, you may notice something. These two gray spots on the map where nobody colonized anything. First of all, why? Second of all, why? Third of all, why? Let's find out in this video. Let's look at these two countries in depth. First, we're going to go to Ethiopia. Now, why was Ethiopia not colonized? After all, it looks like a pretty big splotch on the map. And right now, it's actually a very famous country in Africa. Well, to learn this, we first have to go all the way to the Aksumite Empire, where they used to own some coastline along with some parts of Yemen. It's said that some Syrians that were shipwrecked on the coast introduced Christianity to the island. I mean, not the island, the empire. However, the Ethiopians created a different church called the Coptic Church and separated from Catholicism and Protestantism. Today, this is known as Ethiopian Orthodox. Here's a fun fact. Since they calculate the birth of Jesus Christ differently, they actually have different years for their calendars. Thus, it was kind of exempted from colonialism. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope made a line that would give half of the Earth's land to Portugal and half of the Earth's land to Castile and Aragon, or Spain as it is today. I mean, I guess Castile was the one that organized the overseas territory, so it would really be going all to Castile. Anyway, Ethiopia was actually excluded from this, as they were Christian, and the Pope did not want to colonize Christian states. In fact, they are one of the oldest Christian empires, having adopted the religion in the 4th century. Thank you, Papal States. However, this didn't stop them from going into a war. Fascist Italy, in I think 1936, invaded Ethiopia and occupied it. However, the government in exile persisted and joined World War II. This was never really accepted by most countries, and Italy was kind of denounced of this. When Italy lost, Ethiopia regained its land, and currently it is part of the UN. Actually, Ethiopia's flag, color scheme, actually gives most of the African countries their color scheme. Red, green, yellow, and black. Although Ethiopia has a blue globe instead of black. I actually have a friend who's from Egypt but follows Ethiopian Orthodox. So that's where I learned most of this. Anyway, next is Liberia. Now, Liberia is a much smaller area. However, it isn't landlocked. I mean, Ethiopia also used to not be landlocked. Like I said before, it used to have full control of the Red Sea as Axum. And until Eritrea and Djibouti, it used to have coastline. But anyway, nobody cares about that right now. Let's go to Liberia. It was surrounded by French West Africa, and it bordered Sierra Leone, another, you guessed it, colony. So how did it not get colonized? Because somebody beat them to it. This is Liberia's flag. And now I think you can understand why they were not colonized. Now you see, there was an organization called the American Colonial Association. I can't talk today. Association, created in 1816. Now this was meant to send slaves that were emancipated back to Africa, while still following a constitution similar to the USA. Here, this country was made, along with the Republic of Maryland in Africa, which was later absorbed by Liberia. Which, by the way, their flag looks nothing like Maryland. I heard there were also other ones, but these two are the main ones. The USA did not recognize it as their colony, nor independent. However, it accepted it as a protectorate of the USA. However, after the US Civil War, the USA had full control of the southern slave states, who weren't slave states anymore, because full control. So the USA decided to let Liberia go. And that's kind of the reason nobody colonized it. Because if they did, they would be in hot water with one of the greatest superpowers the world has ever known. Liberia's capital today is Monrovia, in honor of US President James Monroe, who also created the Monroe Doctrines, banning any further colonization of the Americas. There were other independent nations in Africa during the scramble for Africa. For example, the Dutch Boer republics, who broke away from the Dutch to form their own, you guessed it, republics. Also, the Lesotho and Eswatini tribes, which later, Lesotho. Let me check my notes. Yeah, Lesotho. Until they became protectorates and later independent and made an eyesore of a hole in South Africa. However, these were conquered and were recognized by all as conquered. These two had strict laws around them and were never conquered at all. Liberia especially, which was independent the second it touched the ground. And those are the two African nations never to be colonized. Now let's move our eyes away from these two nations and look at all the other nations. Two nations out of more than 50 nations in Africa were not colonized. Two nations. So I thought it would be fun for the last few minutes of the video to tell fun facts about a few. Libya was meant to go to Italy, France, and the UK. However, the Ottoman Empire had an area called Tripolitania there, which the three powers swiftly took. Also, the Democratic Republic of the Congo was owned by the King of Belgium as his own private dominion until the Belgians realized what dirty, disturbing stuff he was doing there and took control of the island themselves. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please remember to subscribe and I'll see you next time.